On August 17th, 2024, the real estate industry will experience the largest change in the way homes are bought and sold in nearly 100 years.
Buying and selling a home could get quite a bit cheaper. That's because the National Association of Realtors has now agreed to rewrite a number of the rules that regulate America's housing industry.
The trade group will eliminate rules on commissions for agents brokering a home sale. That means the standard 5 to 6% commission could be gone by this summer.
Earlier this year, the National Association of Realtors agreed to a class action lawsuit settlement in the amount of $418 million. But the damages payment is not the biggest headline. The settlement included several changes to how commissions are paid, and those changes will affect everyone in the real estate transaction: the buyers, the sellers, and of course the real estate agents. And with the court approval of the settlement, the changes go into effect August 17th of 2024. There is a ton of confusion and misinformation about how these changes will actually affect the average home seller and home buyer. So in this video, I'm going to go step by step on what your options are if you're thinking about selling or buying a home after August 17th. But first, I want to let you know who NAR is. NAR is the National Association of Realtors. It is the largest trade organization in the U.S. When a real estate agent gets their real estate license, one of the first things they need to do is to join NAR. And once they join NAR, they earn the designation of Realtor. And by carrying that designation, they are pledging to the NAR Code of Ethics and Conduct. Now, it's not required that you join NAR. However, just about every brokerage in the country does have that requirement, because in order to have access to the local and state associations, you have to be a member of NAR. So when an agent gets their license, they join the NAR, the state board, and the local board. And that gives them access to all the required forms for their particular state. Now, the NAR does not have their own MLS or multiple listing service. However, they do have MLS policies. So if a member of the NAR wants to list a property in an MLS, that MLS needs to comply with the MLS policies. Therefore, the MLS, the local MLS, needs to be a member of NAR. And part of those MLS policies is to ensure that the listing agents are disclosing the proper information and conducting themselves in line with the Code of Ethics. Now, the NAR does not govern commission amounts. They do govern how commissions are disclosed, but they don't have any say in the actual amounts that are being charged. That is up to the individual brokerage and the agent. Now, traditionally, commissions have always been paid by the seller, and the process went like this. The seller would meet with the listing agent, they would discuss terms, they would discuss the pricing of the home, and they would discuss commission. Now, commissions have always been negotiable. Sometimes the seller would ask for discount, sometimes they would not. But it was a discussion between the seller and the listing agent on what the agreed on commission amount would be. Now, I know some of you watching may not have had this experience, and unfortunately, there are unethical agents that didn't follow the Code of Ethics that NAR outlines, and maybe told you that that is the price that everybody charges. The important thing to know is that that is not an NAR governed decision. It's not a local MLS or even a brokerage governed decision. That was the individual agent acting unscrupulous. Now, once the seller and a listing agent agreed on a commission, this is how it would be broken down. You would have the home for sale and the sale price. You would have the commission amount based on that sale price. So say it's $500,000 and the commission is 6%. Now, that commission would typically be split 50-50. 50% going to the listing agent's brokerage, 50% going to the buyer agent's brokerage. And then that 50% then gets split again depending on what the agent's agreement is with the brokerage. Part of that goes to the company and then the other part goes to the agent. Now, prior to the 1990s, there wasn't a buyer agent, it was just another sub-agent of the seller. And then consumer advocates got involved and they said buyers deserve representation as well. The sub-agents are not representing them. They deserve having representation themselves. In the 1990s, buyer agency was launched. And at that point, the MLS then changed to offer a buyer agent fee. And the structure of how the commission was broken down didn't change, including how it was listed in MLS. It was just who was being paid. Now, fast forward to 2019, and a class action lawsuit is filed against the National Association of Realtors, alleging that commissions are being fixed and that sellers were not properly informed that part of their commission is going to pay a buyer's agent. And because buyer agent compensation is also listed in MLS, they also allege that buyer agents were steering clients to properties with higher fees. Now, part of that $418 million settlement came some serious changes to how we handle commissions. The biggest change is the decoupling of commissions. The seller commission no longer automatically includes a buyer agent compensation fee. Home sellers pay their listing agent directly, buyers pay their buyer agent directly. Now, in theory, according to the DOJ and NAR, if a seller is not paying a buyer agent directly, instead of paying 5 to 6% commission, they're only paying 2.5 to 3% directly to their listing agent. So in turn, they don't need to charge as much because they're saving money on the buyer agent fee. However, you and I both know that if a seller is selling their home at $500,000 and paying out a 5 to 6% commission versus a 2.5 to 3% commission, they're not going to change the list price on that house. They're still going to charge $500,000. So it does nothing to lower the home prices. The seller ultimately is going to pocket more money. And they also believe that in theory, a buyer negotiating directly with a buyer agent will create more competition with that buyer agent, which could result in lower commissions. And I don't disagree with that. However, the buyer agent hasn't been paying their fees out of pocket up to this point. So now, regardless of whether it's $10 or $5,000, this is money that they weren't prepared to come out of their pocket. Now, the other part of the settlement is buyer agency agreements. And buyer agency agreements have to be signed on the first meeting of a property between a buyer and a buyer agent. Now, a lot of states in the country, Massachusetts is one of them, we have been doing buyer agency since shortly after I got my license in 1996. However, it's never been required. It is a broker-to-broker decision on whether that office will have required buyer agency agreements. After August 17th, every agent in the country will be required to have a buyer agent agreement with a buyer before they look at a property. Now, after August 17th, it is going to become more crucial than ever to work with an agent when you're buying or selling a home that is an expert negotiator, but also knows the ins and outs of this settlement like the back of their hand. You don't want to work with an agent that seems like they know what they're doing, but they really don't, and you'll end up leaving money on the table. Now, I have been helping people buy and sell homes since 1996, and I have come across some lousy agents, and I've come across some really great agents as well. And I've learned how to weed out the good from the bad. So if you want to be connected to one of those great agents, click the link down below, fill out the short referral form. I'll give you a quick call, we'll have a conversation, and I'll connect you to an agent that'll take great care of you. Now let's fast forward to August 17th, and you want to list your house for sale. What does that look like, and what are your options? So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to sit down with your listing agent and you're going to negotiate what you're going to pay that listing agent for their service. But while you're negotiating with the listing agent, I want you to pay attention to how well they're negotiating. Their ability to negotiate on their own behalf is a great indicator on how well they're going to negotiate on your behalf when an offer comes in. If they roll over and accept your request for a much lower commission, how are they going to negotiate an offer if the offer comes in lower? It's a great way to gauge the professionalism and the negotiation strength of that agent. Now, once you agree what you're going to pay the listing agent, now you can decide and have a discussion on what, if anything, you're going to compensate a buyer agent. Now, you do not have to pay a buyer agent anything. However, there are a few things that you really need to pay attention to. The first thing is you want to ask your agent what is customary in your area. If you have several properties that you're competing against, and all those properties are offering some sort of buyer compensation, and you're not, you very well may lose a buyer based on the fact that the buyer is going to have to pay more for your property because they're going to have to pay for their buyer agent out of pocket. Now, yes, they can ask for compensation when they make an offer, and you can make that part of your negotiation. However, if you can't get them to the table because the other properties are already offering the compensation, then you won't have that opportunity. Now, you can set this up however you want. It depends on the savviness of your listing agent. You can have a full compensation of whatever's customary in your area, 2%, 2.5%, 3%, or you can have partial compensation. You can offer the compensation to the buyer 1%. Keep in mind, you're offering the compensation to the buyer directly, not the buyer agent. It's completely separate after August 17th. The buyer agent has no connection to the seller whatsoever. All your compensation is going to the buyer. Which means if the buyer agent has an agreement for 2% with the buyer and you give a compensation of 2.5%, that extra 0.5% goes to the buyer directly. They keep that money. Now, one of the changes that is going to happen with this lawsuit is the removal of the buyer agent fee from MLS. Because the seller is no longer paying that fee and that fee is negotiated between the buyer and the buyer agent, there's nothing to list in MLS. However, concessions are listed in MLS. So if you decide decide to make a buyer agent concession, that will be listed in MLS. The buyer agents will be able to let the buyers know what you're offering. Now, if you decide not to hire a listing agent and you're going to sell it yourself, you just want to make sure that if you are offering a buyer compensation, you want to make sure that that is listed on whatever website you put it on. Now, it's important to remember that buyers that have agreements with buyer agents, they've looked at other properties, they have a contractual agreement with a buyer agent. If they want to look at your home and you're listing it yourself, that buyer agent's coming along. You have to negotiate with that buyer agent. It doesn't mean you have to compensate the buyer for their agent. It just means that that is going to be part of the process. They're going to be someone that you're going to have to deal with. Now, you might be thinking, I don't want to lose out on any potential buyer interest. If I'm not going to pay a buyer agent fee, I might lose out on all those people coming into my house. I just want to do it the old way. I want to do 5%, 6%, and open my doors to as many people as possible. And the answer is yes, you most certainly can. It will be different in how it's executed, but you can certainly do it that way. The only difference on the fee is that instead of paying that 5 or 6% to the agency, your listing agent gets whatever you negotiate, and then the other percentage goes directly to the buyer, and then they compensate their buyer agent. And then the last thing I'll mention is that when offers do come in, the negotiation process is going to look different. And that is why it is so crucial to have an experienced agent, an agent that knows how to navigate this new way of negotiating commissions. Because if you decided not to offer a buyer concession to compensate for their agent, and you receive several offers, some of those offers might be a good price, but ask for compensation, maybe a little lower price, but no compensation, and all different types of variations in between. And it's going to take a skilled agent to help decipher really which offer benefits you the most. Now, the sellers may save some money on this, especially if they live in an area of the country where the buyers are able to pay for those buyer fees out of pocket. But how do you navigate if you're on the buying side? And this is where the settlement gets very tricky, more so than on the selling side. Now, the first thing you need to know is that after August 17th, if you want to see a property that is listed in MLS, you will be required to sign a buyer agent agreement with that agent. Now, everything in the buyer agent agreement is negotiable. That agreement can be for one single property, it can be for 2 weeks, it can be for 30 days or 3 months. And the amount that you negotiate with the buyer agent is also negotiable. And as a side note, if a buyer agent tells you it's not, you need to find another buyer agent. Now, I'm anticipating a lot of changes and a lot of opportunity in the area of buyer agent commission. Necessity is the mother of invention. And if you want to take a look at one property and you just met the agent, you're not ready to commit to a 3-month relationship, you don't know what kind of a professional they are, you just want to see that one property, they might offer you a flat fee, $150 to show you the house, or $50 an hour to show you the house, or $150, but I'll waive it if you sign a 30-day extension after we see the house. There's a lot of different things that might happen and a lot of things that you may be able to negotiate with that buyer agent. But the important thing is that an agreement will need to be signed. Now, you can approach the seller direct. You can absolutely do that. That is legal and allowed. Do I recommend it? No. You should have representation when you go see a seller, especially if you are a first-time home buyer. Now, you found the property, you signed the buyer agent agreement. Now you need to find out what, if any, buyer compensation the seller is offering. And you want to find that out before you go look at the property. Now, if you have a buyer agent working for you, then they can assist you with that process. Now, although the buyer agent compensation field in MLS is going away, they are adding a buyer concession field. So that may be one way you can find out if the seller is offering a concession. Now, if you successfully negotiate a buyer concession on your offer, that seller concession actually can get wrapped into your mortgage if your lender allows. Now, the lender typically will allow a certain percentage of the sale price to be rolled into your mortgage. So you don't actually have to come up with money out of your pocket to pay for your buyer agent. So what you'll need to do is check with your lender to find out what their requirements are. Now, every loan will be a little different, and I expect there to be changes with this as well. Typically in the past, seller concessions would be towards closing cost only. But given that we're adding in the additional cost of a buyer agent fee compensation, those closing costs are going to be much higher. So it'll be interesting to see if those amounts change, but knowing upfront what the cap is will help you figure out what the financials are and how much money you're going to have to come up with to buy that house. Now, one thing I want you to note is that if you have a buyer agent agreement and say the buyer agent agreement is for 2% of the purchase price, that's what you're agreeing to pay your buyer agent, and you find a property and the seller is willing to give you a compensation of 2.5%, you keep the 5%. Your contractual agreement with the buyer agent is 2%. You're agreeing to pay them 2% of the purchase price, and that's it. If the seller gives you 2.5% and then you give the buyer agent 2%, you're going to pocket that extra 0.5%. So that's why you want to know what that concession concession is up front. That concession might be higher than what you owe your buyer agent, which will help offset the cost of purchasing the house. And then the last thing that I'll mention is that there will be properties that don't have seller concessions that you will miss out on if you don't have the financial ability to pay that buyer agent fee and the seller is not willing to cooperate. You may have to walk away if you can't come up with the funds. And I think that is going to be the number one drawback of this entire lawsuit, is it's going to make the affordability problem even worse. Overall, I think a lot of these changes will be really good for the industry. The unscrupulous agents, the lazy agents that are just filling out a form, putting a sign in the ground, those are going to get weeded out. The good agents will be pushed to do better, to demonstrate their value, to deliver better service. I also think it's going to open doors for different compensation models. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of this as the real estate industry evolves. On the downside, I see a lot of buyers not getting representation when they should because they can't afford to. I see a lot of buyers missing out on offers and getting their offers rejected because they can't afford to pay their buyer agent fee out of pocket. Or they can't compete against buyers that have deeper pockets and can afford to pay their buyer agent out of pocket. And because of that, I see a lot of buyers potentially bypassing the buyer agent and going directly to the listing agent unrepresented. And that could open up a host of lawsuits. When you're working with a professional listing agent, professional buyer's agent, there is a ton of value. It goes way beyond putting the sign in the ground or finding the house to make an offer on. The experiential knowledge of knowing how to navigate issues and problems, and when tempers get high and emotions get high, and be able to navigate all of those obstacles to get you to the closing table is tremendous value. It's something that I think will be demonstrated at a higher level going forward. But in the meantime, if you're thinking about selling your house and you want to know what not to say to your agent, you're going to want to check out this video. I'm Sylvester, and I'm here to help you be a savvy home seller.